For decades, there was one rule everyone in the auto world believed, without question. If you wanted raw power, non-stop reliability, and engines that could survive the harshest conditions on Earth, diesel was the answer. And if there was one name that defined diesel dominance, it was Cummins. That's why what happened next caught the entire industry off guard. While most companies were loudly racing toward electric vehicles, Cummins quietly made a statement that sent unease through boardrooms worldwide. According to its leadership, the future might not belong to batteries alone, and the alternative they're betting on could rewrite everything we think we know about clean transportation. For most people, Cummins has always been simple to understand. It wasn't flashy. It didn't chase headlines. It built engines that worked day after day, year after year. Trucks crossing continents. Buses running non-stop city routes. Mining machines digging deep underground. Generators powering entire facilities without a second of hesitation. Cummins engines weren't about hype. They were about trust. Install it once, forget about it, and let it run. That reputation wasn't built through marketing. It was earned through decades of brutal real-world use. But the world changed. Diesel, once celebrated for its strength, became the villain in global conversations. Emissions, pollution, climate pressure. Regulations tightened, cities pushed bans, and suddenly the very fuel that built Cummins' empire was being pushed out. Many assumed companies like Cummins were cornered. After all, what happens to a diesel giant when the world decides diesel is no longer welcome? Instead of panicking, Cummins did something unexpected. The company didn't see engines as the problem. It saw fuel as the issue. The thinking was simple but dangerous. What if the same power, the same reliability, and the same mechanical familiarity could exist without the emissions? That question became the foundation of a shift that most people never saw coming, and that's where hydrogen entered the picture. This wasn't a sudden pivot or a desperate move. Reports suggest this decision came after years of internal debate, engineering trials, and watching the real-world limitations of electric vehicles emerge. Cummins understood something many didn't want to admit. EVs are impressive, but they don't work everywhere, especially not where vehicles run non-stop, carry massive loads, or operate far from charging infrastructure. Waiting hours to recharge isn't an inconvenience in those environments. It's a deal breaker. That's why the idea of a hydrogen engine feels so disruptive. When people hear hydrogen, they imagine futuristic labs, fragile technology, and science fiction solutions that only work on paper. But the reality is far more grounded. A hydrogen engine at its core does what engines have always done. It converts fuel into motion. The difference is what comes out the other end. Instead of smoke and soot, the byproduct is mostly water. No clouds of exhaust. No long charging sessions. Just fuel in, power out. What makes this even more interesting is how familiar it feels. From the driver's seat, the experience doesn't radically change. You start the engine. You press the accelerator. The vehicle moves. There's no waiting for a battery to warm up. No anxiety about finding a charger before range disappears. That familiarity is exactly why companies like Cummins see hydrogen not as a replacement for EVs, but as something else entirely. A bridge. A way forward that doesn't demand the world relearn everything overnight. Electric vehicles rely on massive batteries, and those batteries come with trade-offs no one likes to talk about. They're heavy, they're expensive, and as they age, they lose capacity. In small city cars, that compromise is manageable. But scale that up to heavy trucks or industrial machines, and the cracks begin to show. Every extra kilogram of battery weight reduces how much a truck can carry. Every hour spent charging is an hour of lost productivity. For industries that operate around the clock, that downtime isn't acceptable. Hydrogen changes that equation. Instead of charging, you refuel. Instead of waiting, you keep moving. Instead of hauling thousands of kilos of batteries, you carry a lighter system designed for endurance. This is why hydrogen isn't being pushed first toward everyday cars. It's being aimed directly at the toughest jobs in the world. Long-haul trucks, buses that never stop running, mining equipment buried deep underground, machines that don't get days off. And here's where the conversation starts, making some people uncomfortable. Because if hydrogen begins to dominate heavy transport and industrial sectors, the idea that electric vehicles will rule everything starts to weaken. That doesn't mean EVs are failing. It means they're specialized. And specialization is dangerous when a company has invested billions into a single solution. This is why some analysts believe this shift is quietly ringing alarm bells for companies like Tesla and BYD. Not because hydrogen will replace EVs overnight, but because it exposes the limits of batteries. Batteries struggle with extreme cold. They struggle with extreme heat. They struggle under constant heavy loads. Hydrogen engines, built on familiar mechanical principles, handle these environments far more comfortably, of course. There's one argument that always comes up next: infrastructure. Where do you refuel? Right now, hydrogen stations are rare. That's undeniable. But that weakness may also be hydrogen's greatest opportunity. Heavy vehicles don't roam randomly like private cars. They follow fixed routes, ports, factories, logistics corridors, mining sites. Build refueling stations in those strategic locations, and suddenly availability becomes far less of an issue. This is why many experts believe hydrogen will grow as a fleet solution first, not a public one. There's also a bigger picture forming. Countries that rely heavily on oil imports see hydrogen as a path toward energy independence. Produce it locally using wind, solar, or water, and dependence on foreign fuel begins to shrink. In regions with strict environmental rules, hydrogen offers a way to cut emissions without redesigning entire transportation systems from scratch. And in fast-growing industrial economies, it opens doors to new jobs, new infrastructure, and new investment. Cummins seems to understand this better than most. The company isn't betting against EV, it's betting against a single-solution future. Its strategy is built on flexibility. EVs where they make sense, hydrogen where they outperform, diesel where nothing else can yet replace it. It's a risky position, but it's also a calculated one. Because if the future really does split into multiple paths, the companies prepared for all of them won't be scrambling to catch up. For the average person, hydrogen might still feel distant. It won't show up in your driveway tomorrow. But its impact could reach you faster than you think. Cleaner air from heavy vehicles, faster supply chains, lower transportation costs. Sometimes the biggest changes don't come from what we drive, but from what delivers everything we use. And this is why Cummins' move matters. Not because it's loud, not because it's flashy, but because history shows that the quietest companies often make the boldest shifts. And when they do, the rest of the industry has no choice but to pay attention. That attention is already spreading, even if most people don't realize it yet. Behind closed doors, transportation companies, logistics firms, and industrial operators are starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Not about whether electric vehicles are impressive, but about whether they truly fit the realities of nonstop work. Because when a truck runs thousands of kilometers a week, or a machine operates around the clock, efficiency isn't measured in innovation headlines. It's measured in uptime. And uptime is where hydrogen keeps reappearing in the conversation. There's a reason heavy vehicles haven't rushed headfirst into electrification the way passenger cars have. The physics don't scale cleanly. The bigger the vehicle, the bigger the battery required. The bigger the battery, the heavier the load the vehicle has to drag around before it even starts carrying cargo. That extra weight doesn't just reduce efficiency, it cuts directly into profit. For a logistics company, every kilogram matters. Every extra hour parked at a charger matters. Hydrogen sidesteps both problems in a way batteries simply can't, at least not yet. What makes this shift even more interesting is how little behavior has to change. Drivers don't need to rethink their entire workflow. Fleet operators don't need to redesign schedules around charging windows. Mechanics don't have to relearn everything from scratch. That familiarity lowers resistance, and resistance is often what kills new technology before it ever gets a fair chance. Hydrogen doesn't demand a cultural reset. It slips into existing systems and quietly improves them. Of course, this doesn't mean hydrogen is flawless. Far from it. The fuel is expensive today. Production isn't always clean, depending on how it's made. Storage and transport require careful handling. Critics point out that energy losses exist at every step of the process, and they're not wrong. But what supporters argue is that these problems are solvable, especially when demand becomes predictable. Fixed routes, dedicated fleets, controlled environments,